Everyone, my name is Stephanie Boozer, and I am happy to welcome you to today's CUGC user share. Got a big topic ahead of us about improving resiliency in your XenDesktop environment, and excited to hear what all we're going to hear today. Let me hand things over quickly to Dave Brett. He is our moderator today. He is a CTP. He's also our networking SIG leader. And he's done quite a few webinars for us at CUGC, and we're happy to have him on moderating for Jake today. So Dave, why don't you say hello and then introduce Jake.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yep, as you said, my name's Dave Brett. I'm a Citrix CTP and happy to be here today helping Jake out with this presentation. I'm going to be in the background answering any questions that come up, and as usual, there will be a blog post that will go out after the webinar in the next day or two with all the question and answers on there. With that, I'll hand over to Jake. Good luck.
Awesome stuff. Thanks, guys. Okay, so hi, everyone. My name's Jake Walsh. I'm a technical consultant based in the UK. I work predominantly with sort of medium to large enterprises, working kind of with a full Citrix product stack. So anything from deployments of small numbers of users up to sort of large deployments of several thousand users, and pretty much anything that goes along with it. So I'm sure you can all imagine what that involves. Covering off two topics today, both kind of geared around resiliency and looking at ways you can improve the resiliency of your XenDesktop environment. So the first topic is StoreFront Multi Site, and the second is global server load balancing. Specifically for StoreFront, utilizing that on NetScaler. So we'll kick off with StoreFront Multi Site. We'll then go into GSLB. Then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A at the end if anybody's got any questions. So yeah, first topic, StoreFront Multi Site. So we'll go from the top. What is it and why would we use it? So multi-site allows a storefront store to access multiple XenDesktop sites. So in practical terms, what that means is if you've got 2 XenDesktop farms, 3 XenDesktop farms, you can bring all those together. So for your end users, rather than having, to access application A, you go to this URL, or to access application B, you go to this URL, we can bring all that together for a single web page for our end users and just make life more easy for everyone. It aggregates resources from multiple XenDesktop sites. So for example, if you've got 2 farms serving different applications, you can bring those together and users will just see it as if it were all in one farm. We can also map users to controllers. So for example, we could say that users on site A would only see applications from site A. Users in site B would only see applications in site B, and so on and so forth. It was introduced in StoreFront 2. It required a config file adjustment for that, quite complicated to carry out. You had to make sure everything was correct. But it's now manageable via the normal StoreFront console that we're all used to. That's for version 3.5 onwards. It's farm agnostic as well, so you can point it at multiple different farms. It really doesn't mind. It will display the resources and it will do with them as you configure it. The kind of key area for me here is it provides failover and fault tolerance at the access layer. So as I'm sure you can all appreciate, I've certainly had my fair share of SQL related nightmares, things gone wrong, problems with SQL. You know what it's like. It's just sort of an area that can sometimes be a pain point for Citrix administrators. So what I'm going to look at is how we can sort of take that and say, right, so in a multi-data center environment, how can we use StoreFront multi-site to get over some of these limitations and pain points. The key point is it provides the tolerance when a desktop delivery controller fails to respond. So just to summarize, in simple terms, we can have one URL to access multiple XenDesktop farms. With that being said, we can provide aggregation and user mapping, and that therefore means we can fail over between farms using StoreFront as the point of failover. So just to go over some of those use cases again, it's not just for resiliency. I'd be selling myself short if I said that's all it was good for. So aggregating sites and defining which sites user groups should connect to. So that can be used for failover, useful if you've got geographically disparate sites. So for example, maybe you're a company that has you know, a large user base on one side of the planet. Maybe you've got another large user base on another side of the planet. Why would you have users all going to, you know, a site that geographically might be a long way away? You just wouldn't have that. It can provide an active-active failover solution across 2 or more data centers as well. And there's no reliance on SQL for that, so or any other replication technology. So for example, you know, if you've got a multi-data center Citrix environment and you want to take advantage of this technology, but you want to sort of iron out any other areas that might cause you problems, you could, for example, replicate your XenDesktop environment and use StoreFront to fail over between them. We can also load balance XenDesktop farms, so if farm A is at maximum capacity, users will launch from farm B. That might seem like a slightly strange option, but let's just take a practical example of that. Let's say you have enough money to buy new server hardware to support 500 users. You might have a user base of 1,000 users on your current infrastructure, but you do have the option with StoreFront Multi Site of saying, right, the first 500 people to log in, or our 500 most important users, will get the newer hardware, whereas the other users will get the older hardware. You can also provide access to legacy resources without having to rely on web interface or another storefront store. So, you know, for example, a lot of people at the moment are trying to move away from the IMA infrastructure. So maybe you're in the middle of a 6.5 to 7x migration, something like that. You can utilize this to help you with that. So for example, set up a new storefront site, point it at both your environments, start moving users across to the new access layer, and then you can start moving your applications. So just to sort of give you an idea of the environment I'm going to use to demonstrate this, I've seen a few videos of things myself, and I always think it's useful when you know what the person demonstrating the environment is using to do that. So I've got 2 XenDesktop farms, each with 2 controllers in the farm. I've only got 1 session host in the farm, the resource in each farm with identical resources. The reason I've only got 1 session host is because I need to cause that session host to fail at some point. So if I was having to turn off 30 servers in each environment, it would take slightly longer. And I've got a single storefront website with all controllers in 2 sites, so everything accessible from a single URL. So how do we configure this? So from 3.5 onwards, as I said, it's all via the GUI. So in the Manage Delivery Controllers option within your storefront store, you quite literally just add the controllers. Important thing to note, you need to add them on separate lines for each site like I've done there. So you can see site A, I've got 2 controllers, site B, I've got 2 controllers. So in this configuration, in the previous screenshot, with just the controllers listed, no other settings put in place. When a user logs in, they'll see identical resources. So for example, I've got 2 desktops published called 2012 R2 desktop. One's in farm A, one's in farm B. Pretty confusing for end users. For example, if one of those was a DR environment, I mean, you know, flip a coin, half the users will go one way, half the users will go the other way. So it's not really an ideal situation. The same goes for any applications available to the user as well. Without any settings for multi-site put in place, they would simply see every application published. So for example, if you imagine you're a business with 30 to 40 published applications, it's going to get very confusing for your users. Even more so if you start naming them, for example, calculator site A, calculator DR or something like that. So it's not really an ideal display situation what we've got here, but multi-site really can help with that. So here's a video I recorded earlier in true Blue Peter fashion. We start by mapping users to controllers. So for my use case, I'm going to demonstrate failover. So I'm going to work on the idea that I am a business, an enterprise with 2 data centers, each with its own XenDesktop farm, publishing identical resources. And what I want to do is have it so that if I have a failure in site A and I lose that Citrix farm, I can launch applications out of site B without having to do anything major that would cause disruption to my users. So this is the controller mapping part we need to do within StoreFront. So we click on Map Users to Controllers. We're going to pick everyone here because we're not targeting this at specific groups. We want the failover to be at a site level, so affect everyone. So just tick both farms and we hit create. So that's all there is to that step. Once that's done, we need to enable aggregation. So this is the part where resources are deduplicated and the controllers are aggregated. That means after this, we'll stop seeing the duplicated resources. Let's play this one for you. So we edit that setting and we click on aggregate resources. That's really important, this step, that we tick both of those. Oops, sorry, let's go back on that. We tick both of those boxes. So that's both of our sites are now aggregated. And what we need to do is we need to tell StoreFront that our controllers are publishing identical resources. That's really important. If we don't do that, we won't get the setting that we want. That box is what tells StoreFront to deduplicate the published resources. Cool. So once that's done, when we then log into StoreFront, we don't see duplicated icons anymore. So we just see a standard set of icons that users would expect. So there's an important consideration here, because if you've got two environments, let's say you've got a primary site and a DR site. If you've got applications published in DR, they now won't show. So for example, if you decide one day, I need to get this application published quickly, or I'll just publish it in the DR farm so I can get it up and running quickly, users aren't going to see that. So in that situation, what you'd need to do is create another StoreFront store, perhaps just for testing or something like that. You can actually use this to your advantage as well, because let's say you've got something complex, like a CRM system, something that in a DR situation, users need to know that they're in a DR situation. You can just name the application as DR-application name. So maybe you've got a SAP portal or something like that. And you could say to users, if this ever shows up and it says DR-SAP, you know we're in a failure situation. So perhaps set the expectation of the users that services will function slightly differently, for example. So this is another demonstration of the sort of practical use of this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off the delivery controllers, so my two delivery controllers in Site A, and then I'm going to log into StoreFront just to basically demonstrate what happens in that situation. So I log in as I normally would. So just to make you aware, the first login here is a normal login. I haven't yet turned off the delivery controllers. So I just want to show you where the application is running from. So pull up Connection Center to do that. You can see it's running out of VDA01. So that's my session host in the first XenDesktop site. So what I'll do now is I'll just log out receiver. I'm going to pull up the vSphere client, and I'm just going to shut down my first two controllers. So now we've got those controllers shut down, I'll just log back in. You'll notice that the login is slightly slower as well. This is because it has to time out. So there are settings within StoreFront you can customize for this to make that timeout slightly less. But essentially what's happening here is StoreFront is trying to contact the first two delivery controllers. They're failing to respond. So it then goes and contacts the delivery controllers in our secondary site. Now this can be customized. I think the default is 60 seconds or 30 seconds. Don't quote me on that, but it can definitely be customized. Just something I want to show you in this pane, you'll notice some additional applications as well. What I've done here is I've published Maths Input Panel, for example, from my DR site, just to give you an idea that when we are in a DR situation or when we are in a failover situation, the extra applications published in Site B will be shown to the end user. So just to sort of give you an idea of the thing I was talking about in the previous slide. We can then launch the application, and we'll see that it comes out of the VDA in the secondary site. So there we go, there's Notepad. You'll have to excuse the slow speed of my lab environment. I'm afraid it's not the fastest environment out there. We can see from this screenshot we're running in VDA02. So in that situation, 2 delivery controllers have been turned off. That essentially brings down our site A. And as an end user, we can log into StoreFront and we can access our applications without knowing that there's even a problem. A slightly slower login, to be honest, probably wouldn't be noticed by most users. More so if we customize the timeout as well to give a slightly more responsive feel. So perhaps lower the timeout, beyond those default values. So this is an interesting one. If all of the VDAs in the site fail, what happens then? I did some testing around this just to kind of ascertain what goes on. But this is a really good example of how resilient this actually makes your environment. So we just log back in. Go back to our apps. We'll click on Notepad. So I'm just going to bring up Connection Center as well, just to show where this is running. So that's running out of VDA01, which is our session host in Site A. I'm now going to shut that virtual machine down. Now what's interesting here is that even though that's shut down, and you can see it's not running at all, if we then go and re-click on Notepad, what then happens is StoreFront contacts the delivery controllers in Site A, requesting the resource. They then respond saying that they don't have a resource available. StoreFront will then deduplicate the resource it's got from Site B and present that to the end user. So even without logging in or logging out or back in, just re-click on our application, we've been able to get back into our app in a failure scenario. So that's quite a powerful option as well, in terms of giving your end users a seamless experience where even in a failure situation, their apps still launch as they would normally expect. So that's just another good example of this, this type of configuration. So that covers off StoreFront Multi-Site. We'll come on to the questions for that bit slightly later. If anybody's got any questions, definitely like to hear them. But hopefully that gives you a good overview of just how powerful multi-site can be. If you're a company with multiple data centers, and this is not massively difficult to put in, and what it can do for your sort of user base in terms of giving them that seamless experience, making sure that in a failure situation things still function as best they can, as we've seen. It really can do some wonders there. So we'll move on now to GSLB for StoreFront. This one, slightly bigger topic, but this is again something that can be really powerful for not just for your end users. Actually, I would say that GSLB is a bit of a lifesaver for us administrators. What it can do is basically provide a very, very tolerant layer of protection against failures. So hopefully you'll see. So just to cover off what it is and why we'd use it. So we can provide a seamless failover of StoreFront services. So make the access layer highly available, make sure that it's as bulletproof as it can be. It can be combined with the multi-site setup I've just demonstrated. So if you've got resiliency at the site level, we've got SQL with something like always on availability groups. We've then got StoreFront multi-site, and we've then got NetScaler GSLB. I mean that's 3 very powerful layers of resiliency there, and this is really the icing on the cake if that's the approach you go for. So in practical terms, just to kind of give you an overview of what that actually means, it's sort of all well and good talking high level, but this is just to give you an idea of what it really means. So we can give users a single access point for StoreFront services, so no worrying about a DR URL or having to suddenly update our DNS servers, DNS records, sorry, in a DR event. So that's good. Makes life nice and easy for the users. Makes things nice and easy for us administrators as well. It supports all standard StoreFront features. GSLB, if I could describe it, is very clever use of DNS. And that means, we don't lose any feature sets. We don't have anything we can't do really. The failover is in a matter of seconds. So I think the default time to live is 5 seconds. So if a user tries to go to a URL and storefront happens to fall over within that couple of seconds, within 5 seconds, the page will be back up again. So that's really quite powerful. Doesn't require anything other than DNS, NetScaler, and storefront to achieve. So for most Citrix administrators, I would certainly be amazed if you're managing to work without DNS. And NetScaler and storefront kind of pretty important for a Citrix environment too. So yeah, it doesn't really require anything too fancy. And it allows a resilient access layer you can combine with the multi-site storefront setups. And as I say, that can give you sort of environments with pretty extreme levels of resiliency. Not just resiliency at a site level, resiliency at a data center level. So really quite powerful. So just to kind of take you through what my lab environment looks like for this. My poor lab server was crying, I think, when I tried to run this on it. But just to give you an idea of what I've used to provide the demonstrations and what that looks like. So I've actually just got a single XenDesktop site for this. The reason for that is I don't actually have enough processing power to run 2 in my lab. But the reality is the demonstration here is around the GSLB setup on NetScaler and the storefront. So as long as we can prove that we can launch an application, that's all we really need that for. I've got 4 storefront servers, 2 in each data center, and those are load balanced by 4 NetScaler VPX 1000 units, set up in 2 HA pairs. So certainly in my role as a consultant, that's a pretty standard setup. 2 storefront servers, 2 NetScalers in a HA pair. And if I work with customers that have got multiple data centers, that would tend to be the setup in each data center. I've set up a DNS zone called storefront-gslb.jake.lab. That's my lab internal domain name, and that's going to be our access point for the service. And that zone actually gets delegated to the NetScalers, so they're authoritative for the zone. I'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. So essentially, as it now stands, we've got 1 XenDesktop site, and I've got 2 storefront URLs for access. So I've got a storefront URL for each data center. So just to run through what a typical GSLB setup contains. So the global server load balancing domain, this is essentially the publicly resolvable domain name. So in my case, storefront-gslb.jake.lab. If you were an internal business, that would probably be the internal URL for storefront that you're using. The site is essentially the top level entity. So in each data center, we'll be defining a GSLB site, and we'll be telling each HA pair about the corresponding remote site in the other data center. And data about those sites is shared between the NetScaler units using something called metric exchange protocol. Basically, that allows the NetScalers to communicate the status of the site. So, for example, if one NetScaler HA pair falls over due to a power outage in a data center, then metric exchange protocol is what determines that that's not available. Then we've got a load balancing virtual server. So that's essentially what directs client requests. That's pretty similar to what most of you are probably used to around using storefront load balancing and various other services. We've then got the actual global server load balancing service. So that monitors the state of the service, and then from there, users directed to the resource. So just to give you an idea of what the lab environment looks like, I always think it's easier to visualize than it is to try and imagine it in your head. So essentially, I've got my XenDesktop site, and then I've got 2 storefront servers in each data center, load balanced by the NetScaler VPX 1000 HA pair. I've got 2 URLs, so you could go to either URL and they would work. You would access the same apps. In reality, this would probably be more likely to be 2 XenDesktop sites, if you're a big organization, but just for the purposes of proving that I can launch an application, 1 site is sufficient here. So just to look at what we actually need to set up, I think it kind of falls into 3 chunks, if you like. So we need an authoritative DNS listener on the NetScaler units. What that means is that the NetScaler can listen for and respond to the DNS requests. That can actually be a subnet IP. I would use the subnet IP because otherwise you need another address. Keep it nice and simple. We then need a delegated DNS zone so that when a client makes a request for a record in that zone, it's not one of our internal DNS servers responding with a record. We need it to be the NetScaler. That's kind of critical for GSLB. The whole premise of GSLB is that the NetScalers respond to those DNS requests. Because the time to live is set so low, by the time a user has logged into StoreFront and launched an application, the next time they come back to StoreFront, that DNS record will have expired. They'll then make a new request. So what that means is if in that time period we've had a failure, that new DNS request will get them pointed at the new service. So that really is critical. And then the third part is to create the GSLB domain, sites, services, and virtual servers. That's really about building the config on the NetScaler. So this is just an important note. Metric exchange protocol is required for the NetScaler to NetScaler communication. The firewall ports for that need to be open, as do all of the other ports you'll need to use. Metric exchange protocol uses TCP 3009 and 3011. Well worth a look at Carl Stalhard's website for that. He's got pretty much the best resource for NetScaler firewall rules I've ever seen. So yeah, well worth a look at that. Just in my lab, everything's in a single VLAN. I haven't sort of put any firewalls in place. I know that's not really the reality in production, but for proving the concept and giving you a good overview, that's certainly makes my life easier. So lab environment can kind of be configured in two ways. You can either go with an active-active route, or you can go with an active-passive route. So in active-active, what we've essentially got is our storefront-GSLB URL. That's what people will be using to access. That's delegated as a DNS zone to the NetScalers. So when you open up a client web browser, you type that URL in. Your DNS request is routed to the NetScaler. It doesn't go, the Windows server, DNS server doesn't respond to that. You're then directed in active-active to one of the two site-based load balancers. At that point, GSLB has really completed its job. It's looked to see what's up. It's given you a DNS request for a working load balancer, and then you've accessed your storefront page. So if your environment at the moment already has, for example, load balancers configured for storefront, then GSLB is just an extra layer on top, really. It's not a huge change. And if you've got URLs already configured, things set on clients, then by just playing around with DNS and pointing them at a new GSLB service, you can actually make things quite a lot more resilient by just implementing this layer. So certainly well worth considering that. It's a pretty similar story in active-passive as well. Requests would always go to the primary site unless there was a failure condition, in which case they would be directed to the secondary. Again, that's pretty similar if you've ever worked with backup virtual servers on a NetScaler, directing clients to alternate locations in the event of a failure situation. That's the same with GSLB. So in this active-passive example, a user opens up their web browser, they go to storefront-GSLB.jake.lab. The NetScalers respond and say, this is the primary, go, and it redirects them to that site, load balancers, and then if there was ever a failure situation there, they would be directed to the secondary. Just worth pointing out, I know I've got URLs for storefront A and storefront B in this. Those are literally just to tell you which site, so GSLB won't change the URL that the users are going to. They will always see storefront-GSLB, and that can obviously be customized to whatever you need. So yeah, just to give you an idea of the two sort of key options, really. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up the authoritative DNS listener. To do that, we go to traffic management, load balancing, and then services. Create a new service with the type ADNS and just put the subnet IP address of the NetScaler HA pair in. And then once that's created, you'll see it. On the addresses screen, next to your subnet IP, a new ADNS service IP will be shown. Just don't forget you would need to do that on both HA pairs, so they can both respond to the DNS requests. The next thing we need to do is we need to delegate the DNS zone. So we'll just run through this. On your Windows DNS servers, or if you're running anything else, create 2A records for the ADNS listeners. The reason I would do that is it just makes life nice and easy. You can do it by IP, but keep things nice and simple, give yourself some DNS records to use. And they're just created exactly like a client machine would have in DNS. There's not really anything else to it. Next up, we actually need to delegate the zone, so I'll just demonstrate that to you. That's done from a Windows DNS server here. Obviously, if you've got anything different running, then it'll be slightly different, but this is a nice, nice simple one. So we start with a new delegation, type in the delegated domain name. next up, we're going to add those DNS servers. So this is actually the ADNS listeners of the NetScaler. So rather than that being another DNS server, like another Windows DNS server, we're actually adding in both of those listener addresses. Cool. And once that's done, we just click finish. What this now essentially means is that any request for storefront-gslb .j.lab or whatever URL you've got configured will be sent to those NetScalers. So they will respond rather than Windows responding with a cached record or a record that's been manually updated. The NetScalers will do that automatically as part of the GSLB configuration. So what we need to do next is for step 3 is we actually need to set up the GSLB sites. This is what essentially tells the NetScaler units what our GSLB configuration consists of. So we tell each HA pair, so let's imagine we've got HA pair in site A and a HA pair in site B. Each of those needs a local site with an IP address. What we then have to do is tell those NetScalers about the corresponding remote site. So as you can see here on NetScaler A, the site A NetScaler, I'm just referring to NetScaler as a singular. What I actually mean is the HA pair, but obviously you would only make the configuration change on one. So on site A, we've got A, the local site. We've given it a site IP address. And on site B, you can see we've got B local, and we've given that a site IP address. What you'll then see is on each of the NetScalers, we tell it about the corresponding remote site. So that's the local site on the other NetScaler HA pair. So for example, on NetScaler A, we've told it about the local site on the NetScalers in site B and called it B remote. Once that's done on both, essentially we have a complete configuration and the NetScalers know about each other. I'll just demonstrate that to you. So this is nice and straightforward. Create a local site, give it an IP address. That's all there is to it. Again, just adding the remote site to make sure that metric exchange protocol works correctly. That's all there is to that one. I'll switch across to the site B NetScalers now. You notice it's down. That's because I haven't done the B config yet. So I have now just switched across to my site B NetScalers. Again, we do the same, but this time it's B local, A remote. So once those are all created, we'll be able to see that the configuration sync is functional. So one thing I would certainly say as a tip for when you're setting up a GSLB configuration is draw it all out on a whiteboard, or just get a sheet of paper and work out all your IP addresses and things like that. It certainly saves you some headache in the long run. So you can see now, once we refresh the config, everything's showing as active. So that's good, because what that means is our NetScaler sites know about each other. They're exchanging metrics, so they're telling each other about their health, about the services they're offering, and essentially that means that what were previously independent NetScaler HA pairs are now starting to share information around GSLB. So that's the first step done. So this is an important step we need to do. For that synchronization to work, management access needs to be enabled on the GSLB IPs. And that's quite literally a case, as you'll see, of ticking a box, but worth just noting, I actually forgot to do this once when I was demonstrating this, and spent quite a long time wondering why it wasn't working. So hopefully from my mistakes, I'll save you there. But yeah, you just need to make sure that's done on both HA pairs. Without that, metric exchange just won't function. So next up, we come to setting up the actual vServers, services, and domains. Now, from I think it's NetScaler 12, you can do this using a wizard. This just makes life really easy, to be honest. I really rate the wizard for this, not because I forget things, but just because it walks you through the configuration, and it means that rather than sort of configuring from memory or anything like that, you get a standardized approach. So if you're sort of thinking, oh, this looks this looks a little bit complicated, or I don't feel confident enough to set this up, which is certainly how I felt when I first tried to have a go at GSLB. The wizard is really good for that because it guides you through the steps you need to take. So yeah, I can't really sort of sing the praise of that feature enough. It really is good. So what I'm going to show you next is a slightly longer video, just of the actual setup. So this is me configuring the GSLB setup, and then we'll move into some demonstrations. So we start on the GSLB screen, and we click Get Started. Just to note on here, a few important things. We need to make sure that we've got the prerequisites set up, so worth just having a look through those to make sure they're all in place. You don't want to get halfway through the configuration and then find that something is missing, or a critical piece is not in place. So we've got an ADNS service set up. We've already done that. What we're going to do is we're going to just have a look at that, check, so you can see that's all up. We've then got this option. So I'm going to create an active site to start with. So we're going to call it storefront-gslb.jake.lab. You'll see the TTL is 5 seconds, so that's absolutely fine. So what that essentially means, at this point in time, we have our DNS listeners set up. We've configured metric exchange protocol and told each NetScaler about the other NetScaler using the site wizard. And what we've done here is we configured the domain name that this setup is going to start responding to. So you can see we've got the local and remote sites in place. So we just click continue. So we're going to create the service now, and this essentially is our point of load balancing. This is where requests will hit from our end users. So I'm just going to pause that a second, just to clarify on this piece where we're setting up the sites, on the services, this is where I start to add in the load balancing virtual servers. So for example, when I showed you the slide of the lab environment, I mentioned that I've got a load balancer for storefront in data center A and a load balancer for storefront in data center B. This is where I'm bringing those into the GSLB configuration. So rather than having a situation whereby users go to individual URLs for the site, GSLB is going to provide that single point of access and then direct users from there. So that's just a case of adding the virtual servers. I'm just going to run back on that. So you can see storefront site A, it's IP based. Because we're configuring this on the NetScalers in site A, the services are actually load balanced on these NetScalers. So we get the option, as you can see here, to add virtual servers. When we do that for site B in a second, you'll see we don't get that option. That's because it doesn't know about those virtual servers because we're configuring it from site A. There's nothing to worry about. We just do it based on IP instead. Just wanted to make you aware of that. So you'll see I'm going to configure a monitor. In my lab, I'm just using ping. Please don't use that in production. Please use a proper storefront monitor, but just to prove the concept to you, it shows you what you need to do. So I've added our virtual server for storefront site A, and now we'll add our virtual server for storefront in site B. Again, ping monitor. Please don't use in production. Great in your lab, but not so good in production. The reason I would always advise using a better monitor is ping will only ever tell you if the server is up. It won't tell you, for example, if IIS has fallen over, if you've got a problem with Windows Firewall or anything like that. So it's well worth investing the time in just setting up some good storefront monitors. There's lots of guides out there. So we've added the load balancer for storefront in site B. Just click create. So you can see now we've got our two sites set up within this GSLB service. So we just hit continue. Now the virtual server is the point of load balancing. Essentially, this is what user requests will hit first, and this is how things will be directed to a service. So you can see it's got both of our services. It's got a domain binding, and we're just using round robin because we're running an active service. So that's everything set up. So you can see our site's showing us up. So once that's done, effectively, you've completed your GSLB configuration. Everything's set up. What we've got now is we've got a domain name that it will respond to. We've got our two virtual servers added as active, and we've told GSLB about our configuration. So the next step is to get that configuration synced across to the secondary site. So before we have a full implementation, we do actually have to sync that from the master node. So just one thing to bear in mind, if you want to sort of make changes moving forward, or a couple of weeks down the line, you think, oh, actually we're going to swap that server out, or something like that, or we're going to make a minor change, maybe change the URL. Always make the changes from the master node. So in this case, whichever is the active NetScaler in Site A, and then synchronize across. If you always use that approach, everything should stay nicely in sync, and you won't get any issues with one site being out of sync with the other. So it's nice and easy to do that. Just go on the GSLB dashboard, hit auto synchronization, and we'll just click run. You'll see this command runs. Now, obviously, you could run this from the command line, but why make things difficult for yourself? Just keep it nice and easy. Once that's done, if we just go back. Yeah, so we've got 2 sites showing us up now. So everything's looking pretty good on there. These are just all of our services showing us up, so you can see everything's up and running as we would expect. So now we're ready to do some testing. So I've kind of split this down into four key tests, because these are things that I think demonstrate just how powerful this solution is. So operation with all services running, pretty straightforward, but just want to show you that with this configuration it does work. Operation with storefront down in data center A. Operation with the loss of the site. So what happens if data center A just drops off the face of the earth? We need to protect ourselves against that. And then number 4 is a slightly strange use case for reasons that will become apparent soon. But what happens if we have an outage that's perhaps caused by a virus outbreak or something that doesn't just affect physical sites or sites on a particular network link? So test 4 is actually operation with the loss of all but one NetScaler and one storefront server, but in different data centers. Some special consideration around that, but I'll explain why a little bit later. So operation with all services. So just to show you, all of our sites are up. Everything's nice and green, that's what we like to see. And it's the same on the NetScalers in the secondary site. Cool, so just open up a new private window. Now if we go to that URL, you can see we get a storefront page. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Everything works as we'd expect. So just to prove the concept, with all the services operational, just to show we can log in, everything's working. So Notepad launches as we'd expect. There's no differences to an end user. If you presented this to an end user and said, oh, this is our new highly resilient storefront layer, that they wouldn't know any different. It would look exactly the same. Things function in exactly the same way for them. So that's really good. It basically means that when you roll this solution out, you're not going to be having to do loads of user education or going around hand-holding and things like that. It just makes life easier for you. So the next one is where we start breaking things. This is always good fun. So in this video, I'll actually be turning off the 2 storefront servers in data center A and just showing what happens when that takes place. I'll just pull up the VMware client. And we'll just shut those 2 storefront servers down. So SFO1 and SFO2 are my storefront servers in my first data center. So those are down now. What we'll do is we'll just check that the monitors pick that up. So you can see when I refresh that, it's marked as down, which is bad news if we're just running one site, but we're not. We've got GSLB, so everything's good. You can see the service is still up, but it knows that the service for storefront in Site A is down. So we'll just refresh the page and we'll log in as normal. And that'll launch. So no different to the end users there. Everything launches as normal. So to an end user, they wouldn't know that we had a fault now. They would just carry on as normal whilst we're working on trying to get storefront back up and running in data center A. So in this demonstration, we're going to take things up a notch, and what we're going to do is we're going to show a failure that basically shows what happens if we lose all of our access layer in the data center. Probably the only time this would occur is if the whole data center is down, so I'm actually going to turn off both storefront servers and both NetScalers in data center A. So just turn these VMs off. Once those go down, and once those are down, we'll just do a demonstration to show what actually happens. So you can see now, if I log into the NetScalers, so this is the NetScaler, the active node of the NetScalers in site B. So we'll just have a look at what this actually means in terms of our services. So you'll notice now that one of the sites is marked as down. That's because Metric Exchange Protocol has failed to get any information from site A, so it knows that that site's not responding. Consequently, that service is marked as down and users won't be directed to it. The site is also marked as down, so that just kind of shows you that the information there is working and the monitors are set up correctly. You'll notice the page still up. We can go to the page, we can log in as normal, and we can pull that application. So in this situation, we've lost 50% of our access layer, and I'm still able to launch applications without any problem at all. So that's hopefully an idea of how powerful that is. Okay, so this is test number 4. So we've seen so far everything working. We've seen what happens when we lose storefront in the site. We've seen what happens when we lose NetScaler and storefront in the site. Things get slightly more complicated when we want to prove the concept with only one NetScaler and one storefront server working in different data centers. This actually requires a change to the configuration. So the reason for this is because let's imagine our NetScaler in site A is the only thing running in site A. Now, when we configured that NetScaler, the only load balancer we created on it was pointed at NetScalers in site A. That essentially means that we need at least one NetScaler and one storefront server in the same site to be running, otherwise we won't have a service. So in this situation, if we imagine a NetScaler in site A and a storefront server in site B are the only things running, there is no load balancer on that NetScaler that points to storefront in site B. So what we actually need to do is we need to create some extra virtual servers. Now I would suggest if you've already got load balancers like we have, so we've got a load balancer for site A on the site A NetScalers, and we've got a load balancer for site B on the site B NetScalers, what we'd need to do is just replicate those across so that site A has got load balancers for A and B, and site B has got load balancers for B and A. Now, I would suggest if you're going to do that, put them as backup virtual servers on the virtual servers you've created. So what that does is it just keeps the configuration nice and clean. It means we don't need extra virtual servers in our GSLB configuration. We can just have them defined on the virtual server. So essentially that means prior to us making this change, one NetScaler and one storefront server in the same site had to be operational for access to storefront. After this change, one NetScaler and one storefront server in any site has to be operational for access to storefront. So we've kind of changed the dynamic slightly, and it pretty much means we can lose 80% of our access layer. So 6 out of the 8 virtual servers configured, and as long as one NetScaler and one storefront are running, then our users would still be able to access their information. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like visually. So previously we've just had the site A load balancing virtual server in site A, and we'd have just had the site B, so the 2 green load balancing virtual servers. If we now create a corresponding one in each data center, what that means is we can use that as a backup. That makes this situation and this configuration much more powerful, because it means, as long as there's one NetScaler and one storefront running anywhere, users will be able to get connected. And just on the subject of that, when you define on a virtual server, pull up the protection tab and just define the backup virtual server. So I've done this in my lab environment, and on the load balancer for storefront in site A, I've defined the storefront site B load balancer I created as the backup virtual server, and I've done the vice versa in site A. So it's quite a bulletproof scenario, but it does mean that, when we get a situation like this, our services will stay up. So just to demonstrate that as well. So everything's up and running, nice and good. Oh no, we've just had a massive power outage, and NetScaler 1 in site A and storefront 4 in site B are the only things up. So you can see here now, when we start refreshing these, things are starting to get marked as down. Now, just to note on this, you'll notice that even though the virtual server for StoreFront Site A says down, the effective state is up. The reason for that is our backup virtual server has been configured. So if you're in a situation like this, if state is down and effective state is up, that means it's utilizing the backup virtual server. So that is working as we expect. So if we just take a look at GSLB, you'll notice we've got a site down, site A is up. So everything's looking less healthy here, but it's showing that we can still get a service. So refresh the page, log in, and we can fire up Notepad. So even with 80% of the access layer infrastructure down, as long as we've got one storefront and one NetScaler running, we can log in and make use of the service. So hopefully that gives you an idea of just how powerful GSLB can be when combined with StoreFront. And then obviously on top of that, we've got MultiSite as well. That kind of takes us to the end of the sort of technical part of the presentation. We've got a quiz coming up in a second where you can win a t-shirt. So I shall just flash that up. Just to make you aware, if you want to get primed for this, we've got one t-shirt to give away. And if you put your answers in the chat, Stephanie will pick the first person who gets it right, and you'll get a t-shirt. So yeah, if you use the chat window in GoToWebinar, and first correct answer wins. So the question is, what is the name of the protocol used by NetScaler to synchronize GSLB configuration and status information?
That was quick. Stephanie, you got the name of the winner there?
I do. I have it. Do we want them to spell it out, or I'm just kidding. I have our winner.
I don't think I've ever seen so many entries appear that quickly.
Well, that's good. A lot of people knew the answer.
I'm just having a quick read through some of these questions as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any that you'd like to take verbally online for everyone else?
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look through here. So one question.
A lot of them, Jake, and answered directly to the people who answered the question, with the assumption that you would get a blog post up on CUGC in the next sort of few days with the answers. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Shall I just pick out a few of the key ones then?
Yeah.
Cool. So a good one here. Do you have to re-authenticate with a controller failure for StoreFront Multi-Site? No, you don't. When you go to access the resource, the authentication takes place at StoreFront. So yeah, you can just relaunch the resource. So if for example you were merrily working and a controller fell over, you just re-click the icon and it would launch. Just doing another question here. So would it be possible to use the aggregation feature in StoreFront using a single farm or site configured in 2 data centers? No, because the aggregation is for controllers, but in that situation, you're best off using the zones feature. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, I think you've got a post about that on your blog.
Yeah, I have. You can do it with multiple zones and tagging with stretched delivery groups with multiple machine catalogs. I did reply to the guy saying it's very much a business decision, but we'll put some links to some articles around how you would want to achieve that if you did.
Yeah. Another one around the setting for reducing the time it takes to for the controller to be detected as down. I don't know where that is off the top of my head, but I will find out. Good question here around do we need to build storefronts in prod and DR? Yes, you would do. So you would need storefronts in each site for some sort of an environment like this, whether it be GSLB or whether it be multi-site, I would definitely recommend spreading your storefront servers out. So for example, if they're all in one site, there's no real benefit to multi-site, because if that site goes down, you haven't got a route in anyway. With regard to storefront server group, there's no harm of them all being in the same group. To be honest, I would keep it simple and keep them all in the same group, just so you know you've got a central point of administration that then gets propagated out. So I'm going to quick look through the questions here. Quite a few questions around will the slides be recorded. I think there is a recording being taken of this one.
There's definitely a recording happening now. And then are you willing to share your slide deck as well?
Yeah, that's fine. Do you want me to send that to you, or do you want me to tweet that out?
Yeah, you can send it to me. We'll put it up with the recording.
Yeah, no problems at all. Just having a quick look at the other questions. Yeah, there's a few. I'll be honest, I don't know the answers to off the top of my head, but so just have a quick look down there.
And I've also put in the chat a link to the forum thread for this presentation. So for those that aren't getting answered right now, we'll definitely put something in the forum thread. And then, you know, he said he would write up a blog post. So we'll have lots of stuff on cugc.org for you.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. If anybody's got any more burning questions. Yeah, I'll definitely try and get some answers to some of these up and running as well. You know, and I'll get the slides shared. I'll make sure the videos are with the slides as well. So if anybody wants to sort of use this as a point of reference, you know, then you definitely can do that. You know, and if you've got any questions or anything else, you know, by all means, reach out to me on various social media outlets. You know, quite keen. This sort of presentation is a bit of a first for me, so quite keen to get as much feedback as possible. You know, both good and bad. But yeah, thank you all for your time, and thanks to Stephanie and Dave.
Thank you. Thanks a bunch. We appreciate your time. It was a great presentation, and like I said, you guys will get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, to the slide deck, and any other resources we have. And I also put in the chat window for you a link to a very short survey. We love to get your feedback. As Jake said, he wants to hear it all, but I think you did a great job, Jake. But yeah, fill out our survey. We love to get your feedback. It helps us, you know, plan future webinars and find out what you guys are interested in hearing about next. So with that, I think we can return everyone to the rest of their day. Thanks again, Jake. Thanks, Dave. Love to have you back. And Jake, I hope to see you back at another My CUGC webinar.
Definitely will. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
Bye.